Puyaka Puyaka. I'm your host, Tijani Musa, and today we have a very exciting episode and a very exciting guest in the studio today who is about to enlighten us about the field of medicine and whatnot. And before we go ahead and do the interview, I'm just going to take some time and recognize the passing of a very instrumental person in the history of diversity and inclusion in America. We're talking about Justice Ginsburg, and we're praying for her family, for the kids and grandkids she left behind, and may her soul rest in peace and power as well. And so in the studio today, I have a very special guest. Um, I'm very excited about this one because I just want her to know that what all that she's doing, she's representing people like me from Africa, and many other African kids out there are very inspired by her, including Black kids out there, very inspired by her and what she's doing and what she represents. And this means a lot to me doing this interview. It's amazing to have representation in the highest of industries. And so I have invited a good friend of mine, Dr. Joycelyn Cudjoe. She was born and raised in Ghana, West Africa. She moved to the United States when she was 15 years old and attended school in Texas. She holds a BSc in health science from Baylor University and a BSN from Johns Hopkins. After a few years of working as a medical oncology nurse, she returned to Johns Hopkins to pursue a PhD in nursing. She graduated in 2019 and currently works as a nurse research scientist at Innova Health Systems in Falls Church, Virginia. Dr. Cudjoe's background is as a Ghanaian immigrant, and her training as a nurse research scientist. She is well aware of the important links among psychosocial, cultural, and structural factors that influence health and inform health behaviors. She's experienced in using culturally relevant strategies to recruit African immigrants and African American women for community-based research studies. Her research interests include health disparities, health literacy, and chronic disease prevention or management. On her free time, I don't know if she does have free time, but she said she does. She enjoys reading, goes on road trips, listens to music, and take long walks. Welcome to the studio, Dr. Cudjoe.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tijani. Man, that's a mouthful introduction.
Hey, you are doing amazing out there, and I'm sure it's longer, but we cut it short. We don't want people to to get scared and run away from all the accomplishments that you are just starting, and you're going to be doing even more greater things in the future. So thank you for coming to the studio. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. It's a pleasure to have you. Before we get started, in the way we do it here at La Verdad Duele, we love to know the personal stories. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself?
Okay. So my name is Joycelyn Cudjoe. My full name is Joycelyn Nana Isi Techiwa Cudjoe. So AC, I was born on a Sunday, and Techiwa is like the feminine or female version of my paternal grandfather's name.
Okay.
Born and raised in Takoradi, Ghana. I finished elementary school in Takoradi, and then I moved to Accra. And then when I finished junior high, or JSS in Ghana, it's called, I moved to Texas and went to I did my high school in Texas and then undergrad in Texas as well. And as a Ghanaian girl growing up, immigrant child, your parents want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer, or you're a failure. So
That's right.
all along I knew I thought I was going to be a physician, OBGYN to be exact. And went through school, was a pre-med major, and started out as a biology major. And then I wasn't really enjoying the biology classes. It was okay. So I switched to health science because the courses were more diverse. I got to do science. I got to take science classes. I got to take human sexuality, death and dying classes. It was more diverse, and I really enjoyed that. And then on free times or summer breaks, I'll do research in oncology, not oncology, microbiology labs. I was a nerd. I'm still a nerd. And then I also used to shadow physicians, and there was one OB/GYN I shadowed, Dr. John, I cannot remember his last name. I asked him that when I shadowed him, he said he was busy one time, so he had me shadow one of his residents, or I don't know if it was a resident, but one of the other physicians, a female.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were having conversations, and I asked her, so I'm still deciding. I'm not sure if I want to be a physician or not. It's my parents' dream, and so far I've been ticking the boxes, but I don't think I'm living life. I don't feel fulfilled. And I'm just curious, if you hadn't become a doctor, what else would you have done with yourself and your career? And she said if she had to go back, she would consider being a nurse.
Okay.
And she said, so she advised that if you're at the crossroads, you don't know what to do, don't go into medicine if it's not your passion. You have to have the love for the career. It's not about the money. You have to be dedicated to it because you have human lives in your hands. So why don't you consider shadowing a nurse just for the fun of it, to see what nursing is all about? So my sister's a nurse. So I had never really considered nursing at all. So I decided, hey, let me shadow a nurse one time. And I did. And it was okay at the moment. I didn't think it was that, well, it was okay. And then I went on, I finished my undergrad, started studying for MCAT, and I knew, man, this is not for me. I'm not enjoying this. I don't want to do this. And telling my parents, I don't think I want to be a doctor was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Because to me, it felt like you've disappointed everyone, you failed. But I just went to bed one day, woke up and decided, you know what, I'm going to go get a bachelor's in nursing. I don't know how, I don't know why, I can't till date tell you why I made that decision. But I went online and looked up the best nursing school in the nation. Johns Hopkins popped up, and I said, this is where I'm going. So I applied, got in, went to do my bachelor's in nursing, and said, hey, I'm going to be a nurse anesthetist. I'm going to go for the highest. If I'm going to nursing, I'm going to go for the highest degree I can ever get in nursing. I'm going to be a nurse anesthetist. At least it's as close in my mind, it's as close to medicine as it would ever get. And my parents would be okay with this. I shadowed a nurse anesthetist, and one thing she told me was, you will be good at this, but is this something you really want to do, or are you living life to check boxes? And I remembered what the other physician had told me.
Right.
And I said, you know what, let me take a break. Let me work. And then I'll make a decision. And so I wanted to work in an ICU because it will put me on the nurse anesthetist route. I applied for an ICU job in Texas. I wanted to go back to Texas. I got the job. And then they later called me and said, oh, by the way, you have the ICU job, but we're going to transition and give you a position in telemetry. Like, that's not what I want.
Right.
That's not what I wanted. I wanted an ICU job. So you know what? Forget about this. I don't want to do this. And then at the very last minute, my sister had met this nurse on her trip. I think it was a bus ride from DC to Virginia. And the lady happened to be a manager at Washington Hospital Center. And she had given her her card because she told her my sister is in nursing school. And she said, have her call me whenever she's done with school. So I told my sister, hey, the Texas job fell through. And she's like, you know what, give this lady a call and see. I called her, and miraculously they were hiring at the time. I went for an interview. I didn't know much about oncology, but I got the position. And man, I loved it.
Wow.
I loved working on the oncology unit. It was tough because you're dealing with patients or treating patients who've been diagnosed with cancer, going through the whole treatment. Some get better, most of them don't. I enjoyed it. Sometimes I'll come home crying, but then I'll always go back to work excited to help the next person. And then sometime I noticed that there was a trend with my patients. African immigrants will come to our unit with advanced stage cancer, advanced stage breast cancer, advanced stage cervical cancer, mostly breast cancer, some colorectal cancer. I was just wondering, most of them they're highly educated. It's not like these women or men are illiterate, most of them being women. Right. They have health insurance, they have good jobs. Why are they coming with advanced stage cancer? And there was one patient I took care of, I believe she was a Nigerian immigrant. Mm-hmm. She came, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. They wanted to start chemotherapy. She said no. she left. She left the hospital. A few months later, I was working night shifts. When I came, she was my patient. And I went in there, and the stage where she was, it was basically we weren't treating, we weren't giving her chemotherapy at that point. We're
Wow.
just treating her pain. It was
Huh.
palliative care because the cancer had spread everywhere, even to her brain.
Wow.
And so I remember I walked into her room. She would have her covers over her head. I'll call in the chaplain to come talk to her. She was very depressed because the doctors had given her very bad news. Basically, there's nothing we can do at this point. Your
Right.
cancer is everywhere. So I noticed nobody would come visit. Africans, we're big on family coming to visit,
Yep.
but with the cancer patients, family members usually don't come around. And they're very secretive about people finding out whether or not they have cancer. So I walked into this lady's room and said, hey, the chaplain has been over. Do you want me to call a family member, someone to visit? And she said, no, I don't want anybody to know. I don't want anyone to know about the work of the devil in my life. That was what she said.
Yep.
She
Yeah.
passed away I think it was a week later, she passed away. But that experience stuck with me. And I always wondered she didn't have to die. She could have gotten treatment. She refused treatment at the very early stage where we could have given chemotherapy and hopefully slow the progression of her disease. Why did she decline treatment? Why did she say it was a work of the devil in her life? And she's not the only one. Only patients I've taken care of African descent who's expressed something similar. So I thought, well, I like to read. Let me look into the literature and see are there studies that describe what informs African women's decisions to screen for cancer and get cancer treatment. And I realized there was nothing. I wasn't finding anything in the literature. Everything I found had to do with African Americans. And you know that African immigrants culturally were very different. Where we're coming from, our experiences are very different. And you know, our cultural beliefs and attitudes also play a strong role in how we make our health decisions, where we're getting our health information from.
Right.
So with that, I thought, this is the perfect match for me. I want to learn more about the factors that are influencing our health decisions and how we can design interventions to help women like this woman I had met. She didn't have to die. How do we nip this in the bud so it doesn't get to that point? And I always know I want to go back to school. Sounds like I can do research with this. I've always loved research. This is a perfect match. So that was what informed my decision to go back for a doctoral degree. So this is how I went back to Hopkins. My dissertation focused on addressing health literacy in African immigrant women, and then how their cultural beliefs, attitudes, and psychosocial factors, such as their decisional balance, what cancer knowledge, how their self-efficacy, how does it impact their decisions. And spent 4 years doing that, enjoyed it, graduated in 2019, and then I always knew I didn't want to stay in academia. I wanted to go back and work in the industry. So the position at Innova was like a perfect match for me because I wanted to learn more about the health system. There's always a silo between academia and community. So how do we mesh that? So long story short, that is my life. That is how I went from childhood all the way to being a nurse and then going into this where I am now.
All right. Well, first of all, congratulations. What a story, man. What a story. Congratulations. Like I said, you are inspiring people like me. You're inspiring a lot of Africans and Black kids out there on the streets. And we are very grateful for all that you're doing. And I'm sitting here, I'm getting chills just listening to the story about that lady that your observation saying that she didn't have to die, but because of the stigmas, because of the beliefs, because of the attitudes, led her to the end of her life, and she probably died too young. That is just very sad and unfortunate. And just going back to the family dynamic in Africa, what did your parents take of your new route? Is it what they dreamt of, or is it closer to what they wanted you to be?
So when I decided to go to nursing school, interestingly, my dad has always been a strong proponent of, we're three girls and one boy. And my dad believes in my daughters have to make their own decisions. They have to take on a role or take on career paths that will make them very happy.
Right.
Although deep down, African parents want you to be that doctor.
Yep.
So
Engineer,
even from childhood,
doctor, engineer, lawyers.
and the rest of your favor. so, so although my dad said, I'm okay with you deciding to go to nursing school, I'm okay with your decision. It is your decision. It's your life. From childhood, you've always been called Dr. Joycelyn or Dr. AC. So that doctor not coming after your name, that MD not coming after your name, it was tough for them. It took my mom a little bit of time to come around, but they know their daughter. They know once I make up my mind to do something, I'm not impulsive. It takes, I take my time in making decisions. And
Right.
I just knew, well, with the nursing school decision, it was more of an impulse. But then in the moment, I thought it was impulse. But looking back, it was God directing me down that path because he knew that was where I needed to be. And so it took some time for them to get used to it. But now they're proud of their daughter. They still my mom still calls me Dr. Joycelyn. Like you can tell that even if it's not that MD, that PhD, she's going to hone on it. And even when I tell her, you know what, it feels weird when people call me Dr. Cudjoe or Dr. Joycelyn. Just call me Joycelyn. My mom still calls me Dr. Joycelyn. She would tell me, doctor, like, okay.
She's very proud. She's very proud. Well, hey, you still have the ability to go back to school and get the MD.
Oh no, I am not. No, I am done. No. I've spent way too much time in school. 2 undergraduate degrees, and I know. No.
That's it.
I'm allergic to school now. No. I'm done.
Wow. All right. So, and then we can tell based on the processes that you took to get to where you are. First of all, you did your research, and then you went through some internships and jobs to try to help you be well informed in the decision. So we can tell you don't make decision impulsively. So we can tell based on the steps that you took. Also, I wanna know. Let's see. The first question that I wanted to ask you, you mentioned about the beliefs and attitudes of African immigrants are different from African Americans here in the United States. What are some of those things that are differences between the two culturally speaking?
So we actually do have a lot of similarities, and it also depends on what you're looking at. So for instance, with cancer, when I worked with a group, when I was in grad school, I worked with my advisor on a group of women living with HIV.
Yeah.
Their attitudes towards pap testing. And interestingly, that was one of the factors or variables we looked at. And interestingly, that African American women were very receptive towards pap testing. They would get their pap test regularly because they were informed and they made decisions about that. You would ask them about, are you embarrassed or feel uncomfortable getting a pap test? And it was never like a no. I'm okay with getting a pap test. I know why I need to get it. Right. And when I did my dissertation and I interviewed women and had them also fill out surveys, that was one of the questions on the pap test. What comes to mind when you think about pap test? And it was always, a lot of them would say, yes, it's good. I know I need to get a pap test. It's good that I get screened for cervical cancer. Early detection is good. But it's that privacy. Like I have to expose, I'm a married woman. Why do I have to expose myself to another man to test me for cervical cancer? Most of them would say, I'd rather my OBGYN or the person who does the pap test has to be a woman. I can't have a man, quote unquote, looking at me down there. There's certain very subtle differences that impact, at least in my studies, show that we make our decisions differently. For instance, in the African immigrants sample that I use for my study, a lot of them would say, you will ask the question, where do you get your health information from? A lot of them will say, I trust health information that's coming from my doctor. But if my friend tells me she's experienced something and she's done something, I'm more likely to listen to my friend because she's familiar. She can tell me what she's experienced. The doctor is just telling me what they've learned in books. They have the knowledge, but they don't know my experiences as an African woman, as a Ghanaian woman, as a Nigerian woman, or a Liberian woman. But my friend or my sister can tell me more about that. And then we ask them, so when you go to the hospital, how is health information presented to you? How do you want it presented to you? And all of them will go to, well, you can give me pamphlets, but I want to talk to you. Tell me in a story form. One woman I remember said, I remember when the doctor tells me my health information in the form of a story, because that's how we pass information from mother to child. We tell stories.
Right.
That's how we carry on our legacy. So it also depends on the age group of the women. So older women want the stories, want the prolonged discussion. Younger women just want you to give them a pamphlet so they can go. So it's interesting. I haven't really compared the cultural attitudes of African Americans to African immigrants, but the little I learned from these two different studies I've done, there's subtle differences that we often don't pay attention to, but they have a strong impact on our decisions.
That's for sure. Wow. So the first question, because we brought you in to talk to us about the research and the barriers, the disparities, and we wanted to know about the recruitment processes and whatnot. So the first question is, what did you find in your research for a reason why we have such a low representation of African immigrants and African American women in the health field?
And in the health field or in research? So
research as a whole.
Like African Americans and African immigrants as research participants.
Right.
There's lack of trust. So that was the main thing I experienced when I was recruiting for my studies. People want to know, why do you want to study this, and why do you want to include me? Who's going to see this information, and why should I trust you? Like, who are you, and why should you even be trusted? Because you know of the past histories we've had in the US where participants have been, the Tuskegee study, for instance,
right,
syphilis, and recently there's this news and the new information that's out there that women at the borders, some doctors are giving women hysterectomies without their consent.
Right.
So when you hear these stories, and you've heard over and over again of people of color having things done to them without your consent, and then they call it research. When they hear it in the news, it's research. They may be doing things to me that I don't know about. So you go into the community. When I went into the churches to recruit, I said, I'm doing this research study, if you can fill out surveys. Right. And the question was, who are you? Who do you represent? How can I trust you? How do I know that information I'm giving to you is not going to be seen by someone else? So I realized that you have to build trust. You can't just go in and say that because I'm a Ghanaian woman, women will just fill out surveys for me.
Right.
You have to explain to them what you're doing. Help them understand how it links to their lives. Why is it important to them? Why should they even be interested in learning about cervical cancer and pap testing? How does it help the woman and her family and the people she's left back home? You have to build those connections and make them feel comfortable that it is useful to them. And then another strategy I've learned is, when you're developing your research, include these people in the planning phases of the study. Don't just go and hand a pamphlet to them or tell them, I want to study this because it will make your life better. How do you know that's what they're interested in? So when I was planning my study, I had African nurses, I had some community members that I'll share the survey with, and they gave me their feedback before I even developed it as a full-fledged study. And even with that, when I went into the community, I still had to reel it in and do a lot of teaching. So lack of trust is the main barrier, honestly.
Wow. All right. So what are some of the foundational things you mentioned about lack of trust, and then building that trust factor and having a good rapport with the individuals, telling them from the start, having them be a part of the process? What are extra foundational things that needed to be in place in order to have this African and African American women in these studies? What are some of the things that you found in your study?
Can you repeat that, the last half of your question?
What are some of the foundational things that you find in your studies that helps you recruit these individuals to participate in your studies?
So first, like I already initially stated, building that trust. So
Mm-hmm.
with that, you have to get buy-in from the women and their leaders. So I recruited primarily from churches. So before I even went into any church to tell them about my study, I met with the church leaders. My study focused primarily on cervical cancer, female reproductive system. So
Mm-hmm.
I knew as a sensitive topic, it's not a topic you can discuss in front of men and women. So I usually will approach the head pastor who would direct me to maybe the women's leader or the leader of women's ministries. Then I'll talk to them about my study and get their buy-in. Because when you have their buy-in, they can talk to their congregation and get their buy-in or two because they've already established that rapport with their church leader. So that was one first strategy I used, talking to the leaders, getting their buy-in, and then whenever I go into the churches, I also do introduce myself,
Right.
tell them why I'm doing this study, give them a background, why it's important to us as African women, and tie it into our back to why it's important for you to know more about pap tests and how the findings from my study would help improve our lives and our health outcomes. So after you've done that, you think about the sensitivity of your topic. I was focusing on cervical cancer. It's stigmatized in our community. A lot of women don't want to answer questions about cancer, whether or not they've had cancer before, whether or not they've had pap tests. So you have to destigmatize that. And that is the hardest one to do because people have beliefs and attitudes that are already ingrained, and you cannot undo that in a short period of time.
Right.
The most you can do is to educate because a lot of stigma comes with the fact that women or people are not educated about certain topics. So with cervical cancer, it's cancer is death. I'm going to die. I don't want to do anything about it. So letting them know about the importance of early detection, letting them know that it can be detected early, it can be treated, and if you're treated, your chances of survival increases. If you let it delay, your chances of dying are higher. And I actually have a family member who was diagnosed with cervical cancer and got treated. So having that experience to share as well makes you human. It doesn't make you look like the person in the ivory tower who's only coming down to speak to subjects. So building that experience with them as well. And I didn't go alone. I had a research team I worked with, and representation is very important. So my research team was made up of fellow African immigrant women who spoke diverse languages: Pidgin, English, Igbo, Yoruba, Twi, Ga. So we tried to, of course, you can't represent every single dialect in Africa.
Right.
It's nearly
Right.
impossible.
Right.
But having that representation as well played a vital role. And just being open and honest. If you don't know, you don't know. Try to find out and be resourceful. And your research shouldn't end there. You should have a plan in mind that after I've collected my data, I'll come and share it with you. I'll help link you to resources that can be beneficial to you. What can I do to help you? And so it's not just you going and collecting your data and moving on, but build that relationship that can keep going. And unfortunately, COVID hit and I couldn't go back into those churches, but
Yeah.
yeah, those are some of the strategies I've used.
You definitely answered the next question I was going to ask you, because oftentimes we have professionals or educators come in, academia come in and do research from communities. And then what happens after you get the research? What the information informs you to do something. What do you do with the research after you get that information you were looking for?
Hmm. And dissemination is key.
Right.
And in the world of academia and the PhD world, it's very easy to get caught up in the number of publications you have because they say publish or perish. I hate that phrase, but that's reality. Your promotions, your productivity is based on how many publications you put out there. So I always also say that when you're planning out your research, you should have a solid dissemination plan. How are you going to get the information back to the people?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the research participants are not going to read an article in JAMA or Lancet. They want you to come back. So you have to have a plan. How are you going to come back and present the information to them in layman terms? You don't have to dumb it down and make people feel disrespected, but don't also come in using all these medical jargons that nobody understands. If I go back into the community, I'm not
Right.
going to talk about psychosocial factors. Who cares about that?
Right.
Breaking it down to, okay, from my study, I found out that most women have health insurance. a lot of women said they've had a pap test before, but on the knowledge section of the test, it showed that the overall knowledge on cervical cancer is very low. A lot of women don't know what causes cervical cancer. They don't know what a pap test is. They don't know the basic symptoms, signs and symptoms to look for cervical cancer. So these are the needs that need to be met. So today, let's talk about cervical cancer. Let's talk about the signs and symptoms of that. So you tell them what you found in the study, and then you use that to educate them, because you've already highlighted some of the things that were lacking, and you use that to educate them. And then you also find out from them, what more do you want to know? How do we build on this? So you've held a community, and then you can go ahead and also publish in the scientific journals for other people who would read to know about that. And then you do podcasts like this, where you reach more people. People like to hear, at least our generation, we hear more than we would sit down and read. I hope I'm not insulting anyone, but that's
That's true.
And so finding numerous and various ways of talking about your study, that's the best way to go about it.
That's absolutely correct. Why don't you go ahead, talk to us briefly about the work that you do at Innova Health Systems.
So at Innova, I call it a fancy title. I'm a nurse research scientist.
Right.
Basically, what it is I support nursing research. Innova has 5 hospitals under its health system. And so I support nursing research across all 5 hospitals. So each hospital applies for, I don't know if you've heard of magnet credentialing. So it's what makes, it's like the stellar credential that a hospital can get for nursing. Mm-hmm. And so research is an integral part of what they use in making the decision whether or not someone is credentialed. And so my role is to make sure that the nurses across the hospital, if you're doing research, you're doing it ethically. You're going about it the right way, collecting data the right way, analyzing it the right way. So I do a lot of education. I do a lot of, I support the nurses who are doing various research studies. And we also have evidence-based practice projects where we take the best evidence in the literature and use it to improve patient health. And so I also support the fellowship programs that we have. So it's a lot of work behind the computer. It's a lot of education. It's a lot of writing and publication, and a lot of talking. So I thought I was going to run away from teaching when I left academia, but I walked right into it. I did over. So that's basically a summary of what I do.
Awesome. All right. So we are coming towards the end of this episode. But before we let you go, we have to ask you a question, maybe a couple more questions. Just like yourself, on your journey to becoming Dr. Cudjoe, you seek some resources and wisdom from people that were on the field of interest. What would you say to Black kids, African-American, African immigrants, kids that are watching this show? What would you say to them if they are interested in becoming the next Dr. Cudjoe?
So I would say, first of all, I want you to be the very best at what you do. I'm flattered that someone would even look up to me and use me as a role model. I'm still learning, and I'll find that flattering. But I would say, be the very best at what you do, and look for that one person who inspires you, and use that person as your yardstick. So for me, my mom inspires me a lot. My 2 older sisters are great sources of inspiration for me. And so I'll go to them if I have any questions, any advice, and then they have friends they could connect me to as well. And then when I was in nursing school, my academic advisor was my best resource. She had a lot of answers to every question I have about what I want to do next with my career and all that. Mm-hmm. So finding someone in the field, so if you want to go to nursing school, look for a nurse that you can talk to, that you can at least shadow, find out what they do, why they do it, and spend a day with them to see what they do and make sure if it's something you're interested in. And let God be your guide. I'm very spiritual, so being prayerful, being centered, and believing that God will help you make the right decisions and He will never lead you astray. That's what keeps that confidence in me and keeps me going. So
All right. Just in general, that's
Mhm.
amazing. In general, is there anything else you'd like to cover when it comes to health disparities, health literacy, and chronic disease before we get to the last few questions?
So health disparities with COVID has really heightened. Health disparities has never gone away, and
Right.
COVID has really actually heightened the fact that our race, our age, education, there's so many social determinants that impact our health outcomes. And I believe that it is time. We need to, as researchers, as healthcare providers, to collaborate and find relevant and long-term solutions to some of our problems. It's 2020, and to think that somebody's race still has an impact on whether or not you're going to die from COVID, it's just ridiculous. It's 2020, and to think that people still don't have access to equitable or quality healthcare, it's just ridiculous. We live in a land of excess, but then people are still lacking, and it just breaks my heart that it's so. And so, as researchers, as healthcare providers, we can talk till we're blue and gray in the face. That's not what we need at this point. We've done a lot of talking. We talk about inclusion and diversity, but what does that mean? What does it mean to the average person in our community? How do we show that we're indeed being inclusive and diverse? How many people are at the table helping make those decisions that are impacting everybody bottom down? So there's a lot to do. And I, as a researcher, try to do my part and hope that everyone around can collaborate and find solutions, practical solutions and long-term solutions as well.
Yeah, you definitely mentioned it already. Representation is very important in healthcare. And sadly, you talked about the social determinants of health. Sadly, the United States spends lots of money. Almost 18% of our GDP goes to healthcare. But people are still lacking, like you said. We are people of color, depending on where they live, their zip code also determines the kind of access to health that they
Again,
obtain. And that's just very, very sad and unfortunate to think that, like you said, it's 2020 and we're still talking about disparities in health.
mhm.
This has influence in people's life. It has ramification. People die from not having good health care.
Oh
People
yeah,
die leaving their families behind, and the burden falls back to the country. But if we take precautions and we take the right steps in finding solutions to health disparities in the United States, it definitely would make a difference overall. And we've asked you to write a letter to the younger Dr. Cudjoe or the younger Joycelyn
Joycelyn.
Cudjoe, and we've asked you to write a letter to that young girl coming up. And we wanted to see what are some of the things that you've told her that she's going to face sitting right there as a doctor right now. Let's go ahead. Break down the letter for us, please.
All right. So do you want me to share my screen or should I just read it?
You could just read it.
Okay. So, dear Joycelyn Nanesi Techua Cudjoe, you are a full-fledged adult and even hold a doctorate degree, but can you really believe that? You are actually a doctor. Well, not the kind that you thought you'd become one day. You do not cut through muscles and tissues with a scalpel. You tell stories and make predictions using quantitative and qualitative data. But wait a minute, did you even ever think you'd use such fancy words like quantitative and qualitative? Well, you can snicker, throw your head back, and give out a laughter, because the days of burying your heads in books and browsing through pages of dictionaries are finally paying off. Who knew that all the times you spent reading books during break time while your friends played would actually pay off? Well, it did. You're now a PhD holder who gets all giddy when talking about research, statistical analysis, and predictive models. Yes, you're a doctor now, a doctor of philosophy, though. Oh, and one more thing, your sarcasm still comes in handy quite often, even in this world of fancy words. So never lose your sarcasm. It pays off, trust me. Life is unpredictable. Nothing lasts forever, so do not feel guilty for having fun. Do not worry too much about the future. God's plans for you are for good and never for evil. He has his mighty right arm lifted up in battle for you. He will never lose nor forsake you. It's okay to doubt. It's okay to worry about the future. It's okay to fear, but do not let that fear cripple you. You'll make mistakes along the way. You'll lose friends. You hurt people and others will hurt you. You'll experience disappointment and heartbreak. You'll get scared, but never let that cripple you. Let your fear of the unknown be the very thing that draws you closer to God. Let every disappointment you experience be the driving force behind your decision to do better and be a better version of yourself. It's okay to cry. Tears do not make you weak. It's okay to say I'm hurt. It takes nothing away from you. It's okay to show emotions. It's okay to be vulnerable. In your world, vulnerability and weakness do not need to be synonymous. Your vulnerability is your strength. Do not let anything or anyone tell you otherwise. Your ability to show and express emotions will lead you to the kindest, sweetest, most gentle-hearted man you would ever meet. He will become your best friend. He will help you unearth past pain and help you rediscover who you are. A bold, beautiful, intelligent young woman with a heart of gold. You'll fall in love with him and plan a wonderful future together. Do not waste your time kissing too many frogs. Save those precious lips for your Prince Charming. Trust me, he's worth all the wait. Mama, Dada, Nanekia, and Johnny love and support you. They are your biggest cheerleaders and will sometimes be your worst critics. Always remember that they say and do everything out of love. They'll be right there to cheer you on every step of the way. Every laughter, every tear, every second and moment of the day shared with them will always be worth it. You end up living in different parts of the country, but the bond you share will never be broken. You have 5 beautiful nieces and 1 nephew who love, cherish, and adore you. You build fond memories with them. They'll come to you for advice. You, of all people, they'll think you're full of wisdom and hang on to every word you say. So be a good role model to them. Make wise decisions because they'll be watching and learning from you. Finally, have fun. It's okay to let your hair down. It's okay to make new friends. It's okay to lose and not give a care in the world. The crazy decisions you make, such as going on that wild safari in South Africa and the cross-country trip in Mozambique, will someday make wonderful campfire and icebreaker stories. Live in the moment. Be impulsive, be strategic, be you. You are beautifully, wonderfully, and fearfully made. There is only one you, and you are awesome. With God on your side, you will never fail. You'll become a doctor all right. Not the kind of doctor mom and dad dreamt of. It will be a hard decision to steer away from their long life dream for you. You feel ashamed about your decision not to go to medical school. But guess what? You'll turn out just fine. With God on your side, you'll never fail. Just like Esther in the Bible, you are made for a queen such a time as this. So live life with 0 regrets. Apologize when you need to, and always walk with your head held high, because you're going places and the journey has just begun. Signed, Dr. Joycelyn Nanesi Techua Cudjoe.
Wow, wow, wow. That is amazing, amazing. That's a road, that's a life map right there. That's a life map. I appreciate you. And thank you so much. That's an amazing letter. Thank you for reading that.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell a story to my old self. It was quite therapeutic, I must say.
Oh yeah, of course. That is a very unique step in doing that. It's just a reflective way to look at your life and just evaluate some of the things you do. So thank you so much for coming on to the La Verdad Duele podcast and sharing with us your wisdom and knowledge. We wish you nothing but the best. And like I said, we are proud of you and thank you for representing us in the highest of academia, and wish you well and enjoy the rest of the year.
Thank you so much, Tijani. Thank you so much for having me.